Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Dr. Bob Milligan. We are here to talk about leadership team meetings. What I'm going to talk about can apply to all kinds of meetings, but the specific focus is on owner, key manager leadership teams. This is actually my favorite description of team decision making, and we will use this as really the focus of this webinar. So the outside part there is really the frame, okay? And we'll talk about that. Then we have this part of gathering decisions and finally reaching a decision. So if we start to think about each of these, the frame, there really are two components for the frame. The first and probably the most important is the criteria that you're using to make decisions. On a farm, when we're looking at strategy or the overall operation, the criteria is the objective is the vision, the mission, the values, the objectives, the goals, even the culture. Okay, the structure then is who and how will make the final decisions, and we'll talk a bit about that. So if we come back to this, one of the problems is if we don't know the criteria, if we don't agree on the vision and the mission, it's going to look like this. Okay, you've got two different boxes basically, or two different criteria, and that means that we're going to end up with different solutions. I often say that any time when owners don't agree on the vision, everything becomes a battle. Okay, and this kind of helps explain why. Okay, so that's the frame. Okay, now the second part is the structure. Who and how will make the final decision? Is it consensus? Is it voting? Or does the leader make the ultimate decision? So when the leader decides, it looks like this. Okay, the team gathers information, they talk about it, they chew on it, and then ultimately the leader makes the decision. So the frame has to do with that. And so think about a little bit about that. What's your frame? What's your vision? You could even pause the video. So we come back here and let's talk about this gathering information stage. This is a pretty important stage, okay, because it's when we brainstorm, we look at alternatives. It's often called the diverging stage. This is where we seek information and ideas. Here's where the team really starts to come into the power, the synergy of ideas and sharing and piggybacking on others. Brainstorming is really a great tool here. No evaluation. You just share ideas, throw out ideas. Okay, and this stage really benefits from diversity in all dimensions, age, gender, etc. The problem is if we don't agree on the vision, that's only going to increase the alternative solutions. So the vision becomes very important. The converging stage then is when we make a decision. We're reaching a decision. It's often called, as I said, the converging stage. We're converging to an excellent decision. And here we need debate, discussion, synergy can lead to outstanding decisions. Again, diversity can be a great asset if there's a common vision. Now, what's synergy? I love to talk about synergy. Okay, the kind of a fancy definition is the interaction of two or more agents or forces so that their combined effort is greater than the sum of their individual parts. Why else would we have a meeting? Okay, or we can think of it as 1 + 1 is greater than 2. Or if there are 3 of you, 1 + 1 + 1 is greater than 3. I love to tell this story. When I was at Cornell University and I was leading the Pro Dairy program, we had a great team and we had great discussions. And we used this process that we're talking about here today. One of the things that I really was proud of, we met in the building where the animal science department was housed, Morrison Hall. Some of you may remember that name from Morrison Feeds and Feeding in your earlier training. And when we took a break, we'd go down to the coffee room where there were faculty members from animal science, especially there, and they'd often say, well, what'd you decide today? Or maybe what crazy idea did you decide today? Because we had a reputation, and we'd talk about it. But the part I was proud of is many times they'd ask whose idea was that, because that's what's important in academia. And many times because of this synergy, we couldn't answer that question. The idea, the solution, the stepping forward came out of the discussion. So that's the real power of synergy. Okay, and so what leadership styles will be best for your team? Think about that a little bit as you think about working together. Now, we're going to look at some alternatives that aren't so good. Okay, what happens when the decision-making process fails? One of it can be too narrow. We cut off the discussion too soon. Okay, and then we don't have another meeting or whatever the case may be. Then think about maybe the best solution's up here. Okay, where that dot is. Now, in this case, we're not going to ever find that solution, and we're going to have a poorer decision. Okay, you can think about an example. Maybe even again, pause the video. Now, here's another one. Okay, very common to university committees is that you just keep talking with that gathering phase. You never really get to the reaching a decision. Okay, and that can be a danger. And that's actually one of the challenges for the leader, is to decide when are you on that point where the blue gets to the green. And sometimes the leader or maybe even another member, when they hear the idea is kind of cycling and it's pretty clear we're close to a decision, sometimes you throw out a draft. Here's what I'm hearing from the group, and often that will lead to maybe a few changes, but then to a solution. And again, think about an example where you were in a meeting on the farm, or maybe it's some of your off-farm ideas where you just kept talking and talking and talking, and you really weren't gaining anything new. You just weren't moving to solution. Now here's, okay, when there's no consensus reaching. Okay, you're just going to end up somebody making the decision. Okay. One of the dangers of groups, especially if they don't have psychological safety, is groupthink. I actually am on a leadership board that I felt really badly for over a year when I really fell into groupthink. We made a quick decision, and I really should have opposed it. It probably wouldn't have made any difference, but I really felt I fell into groupthink. The group was there. Okay, and so everybody jumps on this again where the black dot is, and it just goes to the solution. May not be the optimal one. Okay, now there's some really great examples of groupthink, and one of them is best going back to the Kennedy administration. There were two key points in the Kennedy administration, albeit short as it was, with Cuba. And the first one was the Bay of Pigs, and it was a disaster. Okay, we basically invaded Cuba, went into Guantanamo, and it didn't work. Okay, now one of the things in retrospect that they figured out was that the information that would not work was in the room when the decision was made. But the group was so excited, particularly the key leaders, both Kennedys, that they went along with it. Now, one of the things that happened is they realized their error. And so when it came to the next crisis, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which, as some of you may know, is the closest this world ever came to nuclear war. Okay, they learned. And they actually appointed, in this case, a designated devil's advocate. Turns out, history shows it was Pierre Salinger. But the point was, all alternatives were planned, discussed, rediscussed. Okay, and so then that helped us come back from the brink of nuclear war. Khrushchev blacked down. Groupthink was averted. Sometimes you need a devil's advocate. So be careful about this group think. And again, think of an example where you might have been involved in a situation where either there was groupthink or where you actually succumbed to it a little bit. So let's a couple things about improving team decision making. Think about your team based on what we've been talking about here. Again, you can stop the video, think about that. What are a couple of improvements you can make? Obviously, we've been talking about the leadership team, but really this applies to